welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's really brilliant to get the opportunity to kind of just to profile and platform some of the excellent work that library services are doing as well. So just a couple of bits of housekeeping first. So the session is being recorded. So everything that you kind of say or do on the camera will be recorded as well, and then we'll be able to share the recording more widely as well for those who can't attend today. We're also using the chat. We try to use the chat to collect questions as well. So throughout the discussions and throughout the presentations, if you've got any questions, then just put a Q and a colon and then pop the question in, and then there'll be a time to ask questions at the end, and then we'll filter out the ones that are in the chat there and kind of and you'll be able to ask them then. I'm not Victoria. Victoria was going to be sort of chairing this. She's off sick today, so I'm taking her place. So apologies if it's not as fluent as you'd like, but I'll do my best. So I'm just going to initially do a bit of an overview of Libraries Connected's approach to death positive libraries and where we are with it as well. So we're kind of looking at death positive libraries really kind of informed by a lot of the work in Redbridge, Newcastle and Kirklees, who've been some of the sort of pioneer libraries in this area, and supported and funded by the Carnegie Engaging Libraries programme. So looking at death positive library as essentially a safe, trusted space, provision of end-of-life choices support, provision of bereavement support, arts and cultural events to support all of that, and to enhance that awareness and advocacy, and then making sure that staff are appropriately trained and understand the issues and are able to then facilitate that. In most senses, it's not a counselling provision. It's a place where libraries can actually facilitate discussions and explorations of death, of dying, of end-of-life choices and things like that, rather than any therapeutic intervention, but something that's a broader kind of more open and accessible intervention for people. And the way we're working is a collaboration as well. So we're working with the libraries, obviously, but also Reading Agency and Cruse are heavily involved in the work that we're doing. Emily will talk about their engagement and partnership and collaboration with artists later on as well. And so we're trying to look at how we can support as a sector a national framework with regional champions, so people in each region being able to act as kind of the local experts and the regional experts to then support the other libraries in the regions. We're working on putting together toolkits and training. There's a lot of things that have come out already. So things like there's a bereavement toolkit that the Reading Agency and Cruse Bereavement Care have put together, along with the Libraries Connected Health offer. And the book list that's come out of the work at Redbridge. And there's also the Tickets to the Afterlife digital app that's come out of the work between Redbridge, Newcastle and Kirklees as well. And then individual projects within that as well. So what we're trying to do to support that is ensure that there's a nationally coherent approach, work out ways where we can develop expertise within that, try and put in place sort of frameworks, standards and things like that that would allow a consistent quality of service in, at the moment, quite an informal way. So sharing documents, sharing expertise and things. But then also looking at how we can sustainably fund it as well. So we're in the process of taking forward a joint proposal with Cruse Bereavement Care to essentially find funding for and find different elements of funding for different elements of this as well. So looking at how we can build up a national sustainable funded platform for this as well. And so the key outcomes really for it are increased awareness of what it means to be death positive, increased skills, knowledge and confidence in delivering the death positive activities, improvement in community support for those who have been bereaved or facing death or dying related issues, and then placing libraries at the heart of societal recovery as we emerge from the pandemic. One of the things that we kind of hear as a bit of a cliche for a lot of things is that it's never more needed, but it really feels like this area for libraries and for society as a whole is really never more needed and couldn't possibly be more needed than it is at the moment. And again, the more we can place libraries at the heart of helping society and communities heal from the pandemic, the more we put them at the heart of the recovery and the rebuilding that's going to go on in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And the more we can put them at the heart of future developments, such as the fight against climate change, those kind of things that are really critical things, and anything where we can center libraries within communities and within society puts us in a really positive position around that. So I'm going to hand over now to Emily Macaulay. So Emily Macaulay is from Libraries Unlimited, and while the initial set of death positive libraries was developed in Redbridge, Newcastle and Kirklees, there's a constellation of activities, projects and events happening that have sprung up around that over the last few years, looking at the same areas as well, and really kind of broadening out the way that we approach these. So Emily's going to talk about funding connections through loss, which is their amazing project in the Southwest. So Emily, can I hand across to you now, please?
Thank you, Ian. I'll just share my screen. Let's see if that does that work for everybody, hopefully. Great, thank you. So I like the idea of being a constellation or part of a constellation. I'm going to take that as a kind of, I'm a star, so I'm running with that. Thank you so much, Pamela, and thanks for Libraries Connected giving us this opportunity to share with you all just some of the lessons that we've learned about an angle that we're taking around exploring, creating that space for an exploration of grief, loss, and conversations about death and dying. A couple of bits just about me to kind of give you a bit of an insight. So, as we said, my name's Emily Macaulay. I'm a service delivery manager for Libraries Unlimited. Libraries Unlimited is the charity that runs public libraries, the 54 public libraries and 4 mobile libraries, can't ever forget the mobiles, across Devon and Torbay. We spun out from Devon County Council in 2016, and I was part of the organisation when it span out. So I've done the local authority and now the charity library running. I should also give a bit of a hat tip to Essex Libraries, where I started my libraries career as a 16-year-old post-work experience, and I've come full circle. Hurrah for libraries. One of the things that I find repeatedly in libraries is that there's often a personal passion that drives what we do, whether that's the service delivery kind of in the libraries, talking to the customers, or the projects that we look to and run. And that's certainly the case for me in this one. I have incurable cancer, and as a relatively young, let's not talk about how old, woman, I have found that having those conversations can be really difficult. It's a really difficult conversation to have with your family and even friends, particularly for younger people, I find that can be really difficult. So I started to reach out to understand what more I could do for myself, but also recognising the role that libraries could play in these kinds of conversations. So this is the kind of stuff that we all know, talking about the need and our response. You know, Ian's already touched on it. This is not a new conversation. We are probably seeing more need for this conversation now after the 2 years of COVID and ongoing. But it's not a new need. And we all know that libraries are about people. I often say that one of my kind of overriding memories of when I was working on the floor in Exeter Library was kind of the blood draining from me when somebody asked me some really complex question about feudal heraldry or something, and as a non-librarian, you know, I haven't got that professional background. I kind of was panicked. But then another day when I was walking around the library and finding a gentleman who was walking around looking somewhat lost, looking just slightly uncomfortable in the space, and asking him if there was anything I could do to help. Was there anything that I could support him with? He shared with me a very personal story about how the library had been a place where he and his wife had come for years. Every week they came. She would often go and pick her next books. He'd often just sit and read the newspaper and then maybe pick up something as he went out. And it was a fundamental part of their life. And this was his first visit back to the library without his wife, who had died a few months before. And that position of libraries, that trust that people have in our staff, means I think that libraries are really well positioned to be the spaces where these kinds of conversations can happen. We're obviously all about the resources as well, and Ian again has touched on that around some of the bereavement reading lists, the books that we've had for various things, the Reading Well, the books on prescription. You know, we've done kind of that self-help stuff, but also that signposting responsibility that we have, particularly in the public libraries, around where you can access support, whether that's to other charities, to statutory. And we do that with so many things, whether that's, you know, the access to housing, access to, you know, support for homelessness. So again, this is maybe just about reframing how our staff think about those conversations, and maybe it's just a different conversation that we're now having. And libraries are all about public space. We are that democratic space. People can just be in our space if they want to. And again, one of the things I learned very quickly in libraries is that people are absorbing more about what's going on in our spaces than we think they are. They never seem to read the poster that says, please don't do this in the space, but they are always reading the other ones. And so those messaging, the way that people can access things, perhaps even without talking to a member of staff or any other person in that space, I think is a real strength of libraries, where this might be an uncomfortable first step for people to take. But also they can come together in groups, either groups they knew before they came into the library. They can be individuals meeting with other people. You know, we all know the individual that kind of randomly walks up to everybody that's in the library and has a chat with them. And it's just really reinforcing that we can be that space for that community connection. So when I was Centre Manager of Exeter Library, we reached out to End of Life Doula UK and Aly, who will be speaking to you all later. And we started running death cafes in Exeter Library from about November 2017. And again, that was about us being a really democratic space. We do have a cafe, but I don't think that was kind of essential in a really practical sense. And it just started to provide that space where Exeter Library was seen as a space where those conversations could happen. I think the other thing that we've learned since that point, and continue to learn, is not presuming that we know the answer. Everybody's experience of death, grief, loss is going to be very different, whether that's culturally or just as individuals. And I think this is an area where we need to be really open to all of those conversations and those experiences. And for us, in terms of this project, we see it as the first step of many more. Obviously, we're very keen to be involved in the wider work and the constellation, I'm going back to it, of the work around death positive libraries across the country. But also, when we started developing this bid, we actually, first of all, when we scoped everything out, came up with a £155,000 bid over 2 years. That obviously wasn't appropriate for our first step, but we know we've got more that we want to do. So we made a bid to the Arts Council England project funding, and I'm just going to share some of the kind of lessons or things that I learned going through this process. I'm fully aware that a lot of you will have done Arts Council England funding bids before, and forgive me if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but these are just what we found. One of the key things I found, having never done a bid for Arts Council England before, was to speak to people that had. So that was people within the library sector, but also reaching out to other local national portfolio organisations. So Libraries Unlimited is a national portfolio organisation, but there are other local ones, and you will all have NPOs in your area, because they have a lot of engagement with the Arts Council. They know what language ticks the boxes for Arts Council. They know they can just give great tips. I found it really useful. And then also reaching out to the Arts Council's relationship manager. Even if you haven't, as an organisation, currently got a connection with them, they exist covering the whole area. So it's really worth having that conversation. We had 2 conversations with our relationship manager, Lynn Taylor, and they really helped us iterate down what, from this 155k, we want to change the world, into something that actually would be appealing, that she could see could get through the process. And again, they understand the process that your bid is going through, so they can give some really excellent feedback. It's well worth making the time to have that conversation. What I also learnt was about weaving what you want from this into quite a formulaic application process. We will all know that the Arts Council has a set form that you need to be able to complete. It has set questions that it needs you to answer, and that can feel quite restrictive. But what we found, and again through conversations with our relationship manager, is that you can still weave what you want in there, finding out ways to tweak things. And our example of this is around our open call, which I will talk about a little bit more. But essentially we wanted to not predict or make assumptions about who the artists might be that would want to work with us. The Arts Council have quite a requirement for having named artists in your bid, people that they know are of quality, people that you might have a pre-existing relationship with, or that already have experience in the field of which you're doing the bid. And we did have those. We created that list and we put that in the bids. But we were really committed to wanting to open up to more diverse communities, diverse artists. And to do that, we knew we had to do an open call, because otherwise we'd be dipping continuously into the same pot. So we were committed to also doing an open call. So it's a bit of give and take in that process. I've put a note on the slide about Grantium. Again, this will not be news to anybody that has gone through Grantium before. I consider myself an educated woman and one that is fairly digitally confident. Grantium was a whole new world. I suggest cups of tea or whatever your beverage is of choice, and lots of deep breathing. It is a great system in the sense that it holds all your information. It's easy to access. You can find stuff. But again, there are very formulaic processes you need to go through, and don't hesitate to reach out for help. Please don't. I found myself hitting a real wall with Grantium, and it made me really question whether I was even managing to do the right thing. I've had online chats with the Arts Council about it. I've had phone calls as well, and they're really there to help you access it. So don't be put off by what on occasion can feel like a bit of a wall. My other tip is to make sure you include an accessibility pot within your funding bid, marketing pot of money, and project costs as well. So we are covering elements of my salary, or my time in this bid. We've also got other staffing time when we have to pull off frontline staff to support the artists and what they may be delivering. Marketing, as we know, is always really important and often the thing that we get to last in libraries. So having a bit of extra money to do that is ideal. But that accessibility budget, again, is really important to us, because when we said we wanted to be able to engage with diverse communities and diverse audience artists, we knew we had to be able to back that up with money where it was needed. So we've already used some of that accessibility budget in that when we produced the open call and the brief documents, we provided a BSL version as well. But the pot is also there for the artists to use, either for the artists themselves or indeed to facilitate the participants getting involved. So partnerships in the programme, as Ian touched on at the beginning, we know this is not something we can do on our own. We don't have this expertise of knowledge around opening up conversations, or indeed once those conversations are open, how they may go, how that may impact on the individual that is involved in that conversation. That isn't a skill set, broadly speaking, that library staff have at the moment. So, as is always the case, but particularly the case, I would argue, around this work, partnerships are power. In addition to that knowledge and the skills that they will bring, they also increase the reach of the programme as well. And I'm really thrilled that we've got such great partnerships to deliver this project. And I'm even more excited that you'll get to hear from Aly from End of Life Doula UK and Amy from Honeyscribe in a minute. I touched a moment ago on the open call process and commissioning the artists. As I said, we were required to have we had to have a named list of people from which we would pick, and then we also wanted to do the open call process. And our brief was that we wanted to have artists explore with our communities. So we picked 2 communities where there's greatest need. So Paynton, which is a coastal town in the Bay of Torbay, or Torbados as they call themselves, and then we went really rural as well into Holsworthy and Oakhampton, who are in kind of rural west/North Devon, and don't have an awful lot of infrastructure in that rurality. And we wanted artists to be able to go into those communities, talk with those communities, and help those communities explore. Now, in an ideal world, that would be done entirely within the library with the people coming in the library, but that would be so closed as to who was coming in. And so what we really wanted the artists to do was be able to reach into the communities, to people that we weren't currently talking to, with the hope that those people would feel encouraged to come into the library, absolutely, but mainly so that we had that widest exploration of grief and loss. So the named list, we had a list of 4 artists that we included in the original bid. We said, we know these people enjoy working around this theme. We'd obviously spoken to them and checked that they were happy to be involved in the bid, which they were. And then when we got the decision back that we had been successful, we were able to go back to those 4 artists and say, right, we've got the money. You now need to let us know what you would actually do with this commission. Each artist was getting £10,000. We gave them a very, very broad framework of what we wanted. And I'll touch on this a little bit more later. But we basically just said to them, what do you think you could do with this? We had 3 proposals submitted from those 4 artists. 1 was no longer able to be involved. And through a decision-making panel, which I would also just note, we included the community in as well. We got a couple of friendly library customers from Paignton Library in that sense to be involved in that decision, because they know the community. It makes sense, alongside library staff. And again, I also got somebody from our MPO team to come along for a bit of that decision as well. So we were pleased to commission Hugh Nankerville in Paignton, who is, by his description, a social musician. And he is doing some wonderful work in Paignton. He's just started off doing some one-to-one sessions with people who are having conversations about their experiences of loss and grief. And he is working with them to create songs and music, exploring and portraying that experience that they have had. After Christmas, he will be doing more group sessions where those will be iterated into 2 separate types of song that will then be performed in late February. As well, as you might appreciate, as well as those conversations moving towards a song and performance piece, they are also having conversations that are giving us better insight into what those people's experiences have been, and therefore what kind of services we may want to offer in order to support those people. And one of the things that is already coming out is how some of the more traditional agencies involved in this support are starting to become overwhelmed. They're starting to have long waiting lists. They're starting to have more people than they can handle ultimately. So there is, in addition to a greater need, there is greater strain on everybody that's trying to support people. So we then also did the open call, where we had around 30 applications from a huge range of people that we'd never worked with before, and a couple of people that we had worked with before. We did manage to increase the diversity of people that were applying to do that commission, and we shortlisted, again with a decision-making panel including community members, down to a shortlist of 6. And then we had another, they were asked to do a little bit extra work, and we included in that some funding for some R&D. It's really important, as we all know, to pay artists for the work they're doing, not expect them to do all this upfront work just on the off chance they then might get a commission. So we were really clear that we paid for that research and development time for the artists. Full proposal came in, decision was made. I'm really excited to have Amy Shelton from Honeyscribe on board with us, and Natasha Friedman, who's here as well today. Couple of things I just want to say about what we've already learnt. Unexpected opportunities. We had some really amazing proposals, and what we ended up doing was, although we could only make 1 commission from the open call for this project, is I've got a huge long list of people that I would love to go back to and work with again in different ways if I can find more funding. So we're constantly, it's that reach, it's that seeing what is out there and what can be done, and it's constantly challenging us to do more things. What we have managed to do is find a little bit of extra money from within the organisation elsewhere to commission one of the artists that wasn't successful in the open call to do some observational kind of sketching of the project. So they're going to come along and they're going to observe the project taking place, and that will be part of our evaluation, will essentially be an animated storyboard, which particularly for this kind of topic we feel is going to tell the story of what the project achieves in a far better way than me saying, oh, we saw this many people and there was this impact and we spent this amount of money. So I think we weren't expecting that, but that was a really great outcome of that. Aly's going to talk to you in a minute about End of Life Doula UK, but we were really clear again that when we start opening these doors to these conversations, we need to make sure that we have places that we can signpost people to, and more than that, where we can offer wraparound services to the events that are happening. And End of Life Doula UK were our first port of call, because I had that understanding with Aly from what she had done with us previously in relation to death cafes. So we've given some money to End of Life Doula UK to run some sessions alongside or around what the artists are doing in those locations, to be able to hold that space and those conversations for people who might be, you know, taking the lid off of things that perhaps they haven't previously discussed. In addition, Aly earlier this year did a couple of end-of-life planning sessions for us, which is a lot more practical, not for the same audience at all. We did one in Exeter, one in Barnstaple Library, which is our 2 biggest libraries. And there was some really great feedback from that about how people felt more confident to have the conversation around death, and had learned some really practical tips around that end-of-life planning. I've put contracts in here just because I don't think we can talk about commissions without talking about project contracts. I've put it in inverted commas. I hate the inverted commas thing, but What I would say is we have tried to find a balanced ground between something that makes sure everybody's clear about what we're agreeing to do when we're handing over that money, but isn't a 25-page waffly legal document that actually becomes really unwieldy. So I encourage you to have the confidence to create those kind of documents that meet your needs, meet the artist's needs, but also allow you that flexibility that you're going to want to have. So our programme, what we have tried to do, what I think we're doing at the moment, is to try and be brave, and give the artists real freedom to explore. So I would say, Amy might say very different later, I would say we have tried to be really open in that brief. And in a sense, we've said, this is the geography. We want you to explore this, but how you do that, whether that's in a library, outside the library, whether that's online, offline, whether that's one-to-one, one-to-many, whether it's you, whether it's run by volunteers, if it's things sent to people's homes, how you do that is entirely up to you, because again, we're not presuming that we know best, and we want it to be community led. So we want people that can engage with the community to do that. COVID, I'm not sure there's any webinars at the moment that can't comment on COVID, at least. We asked that when the artists did their proposals, we did ask that they comment on how kind of COVID resilient their programs were, and whether they would be able to adapt if they needed to. It's great that at the moment that doesn't look like we're going to have to do that, but both artists were made clear in those proposals that they would be able to still do something. Yeah, fingers crossed. That's all we can do, isn't it? So our timelines. So the Named Artist Commission actually kicked off about a month before the open call, just because of that extra layer of going to the shortlist. So as I said, Hugh is already working with people, and he's running the one-to-one sessions. Amy was commissioned about a month later and is starting to do some of the groundwork now. But what we're looking at is in January, end of January, beginning of February, is when the bulk of that activity is going to happen, with the communities exploring what's going on and coming up with the products. And I'm purposely not talking about what Amy's going to do in terms of her work, because she's going to be able to tell you that far better herself. But we know that with Hugh in Paynton, that's going to end up with a lovely performance piece. And as I've also said, Sorrel, who is the animator, is going to be observing those sessions as well in that time. That does just remind me of one point that I thought I wanted to make as well, in relation to doing the bid and then working alongside this. So this is my first experience of working alongside artists, like really closely. Obviously we've had artists working in our library spaces before, but often it's been organised by somebody else. And what I have learnt is, so I've learnt there's different language sometimes used, particularly again by Arts Council, so it's worth just taking time to get used to that. But also it's just about being personable and having conversations, and I've been very open, again I hope, with the two artists that we've commissioned, to say, you tell me what you need, and I will make that happen, and trying to be as open as we can be. So I think that's all I can say at the moment. Really happy. I know there's time for questions at the end, and I'm really happy to take any of those that you may have. What I'd like to do now is to hand over to Aly Dickinson, who is the Director and Operations Executive for End of Life Doula UK, who I've already mentioned, but who I'm really pleased to have on board doing some of our wraparound services. Aly.
Aly, you're on mute.
Just thank you, Emily. I just want to say just a little bit of history, if that's okay. Emily mentioned that we first came across each other because we were running death cafes in Exeter Library, and that was an absolute fantastic opportunity, because I don't know if people are probably aware that death cafes is a space where anybody from the community can turn up and talk about their hopes, fears, concerns, experiences of death and dying, and to be able to hold that within the library and in our local community was absolutely fantastic. Because I think there may be the perception of, oh, you know, if I go to Death Cafe, it's going to be a bunch of flakes, it's all going to be very weird, it's all going to be very odd. But being within the library environment gave it credibility and gave it safety. And I just also want to say the ripple effect from that has been fantastic as well. We can't underestimate that. So what happened was that bereavement support groups were set up. People that come to death cafes form their own groups to support each other with their bereavement. For example, there are 3 older men who meet regularly to talk about the loss of their wives. Exeter University medical students set up their own death cafes within the university. And also the Guardian came and filmed the Death Cafe at the Exeter Library and put a video in the Guardian about advanced planning for end of life. So I just wanted to talk about the ripple effect of all of this work. And in preparation for this, I just did a sort of quick Google to say, why do libraries exist? And I know in my absolute heart and soul, I'm such a believer in the library movement. But I came across that they are an intellectual playing field, so empower people to access information and where people of all ages go for lifelong learning. And that just really, really clicked with me, because as part of the project that Emily's been talking about, we did run advanced planning workshops, planning for end of life. And in those workshops, there's a whole host of information about how people want their end of life to be. So we talk about possibly advanced decisions to refuse treatment, which is how much medical intervention do people want at end of life? You know, do they want everything that's available, or do they want to be allowed a natural death? We'll talk about lasting powers of attorney. We'll talk about all the choices that are available for funerals, whether you want a direct cremation, a burial, you know, whether you want a religious service or you want something a bit more informal. So that just seemed to measure up really well with that definition of what libraries are there to do. So we run the 2 workshops in Barnstaple and Exeter. In Exeter, there was quite a small turnout. We had a lot of people sign up, but I think we ended up with 5 people turning up. So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. I wasn't quite sure why. But in Barnstaple, we had a great turnout and we had 15 people. And we know that those whole bunch of people, 19 people, are now going to go away and do their advanced plan for end of life, how they want their dying to be. And that is such an act of love, I think, because they will be letting everybody know who will be bereaved as a result of their death, how they want their death and dying to be, so that people do not have to make decisions or speculate when they're grieving or somebody is dying and that they love, who is not going to be around anymore. So I'm just so hopeful that I'm going to be able to work closely with the 2 artistes, and I'd love to be called an artiste as well, Emily, you know, a death and dying artiste, to, as Emily said, to provide that wraparound service. And I think what is going to be very, very interesting to explore is that, you know, there's a whole thing that people sometimes find it easier to talk about the perhaps challenging conversations around death and dying when they're doing something else, you know, so that those conversations can take place alongside activities, but also that we're there afterwards. So if anything has been opened up for that individual, they feel they need ongoing support or they need ongoing information. It's just not a one-off event, but it's a continuing event. So I've sort of I've just done a little bit of stream of consciousness download, but so enthusiastic about this project. It's been wonderful. And I hope it does actually have some longevity and what may happen next. So thank you, Emily. And I think I hand over to Amy now, do I?
Yep, thank you, Aly. So yeah, now handing over to Amy Shelton, who's the Artistic Director of Honeyscribe, and as I say, was the successful artist from our open call. Amy.
Hello everyone, can you hear me, Emily? Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to show you a few slides in a minute, but I thought I'd give you some context as to, Emily asked me to talk a little bit about why I applied for this commission. I saw it as an open call. There's very simple reasons, really. One, I love libraries. I have a childhood library infatuation. I was lucky enough, I don't know whether anyone Here is from Enfield Town Library. There's the most wonderful library right smack bang in the middle of the town. And I was lucky enough as a kid to live, my bedroom window could look into the reference library. And as soon as I was old enough, I was allowed to go to the library on my own. And so from the age of 8 till 12, I went to the library every single day when it was open. Yeah, I adore libraries. I love, most of all, the thing that I love about them is that lovely democratic space that Emily talked about earlier. And it's something I've experienced deeply myself, where you can have conversations with anybody, you see all people. People are always doing curious things, people are looking up curious things, and that's fascinated me. And as soon as I could get into that reference library myself, and it used to have little green desk lamps, and I thought it was the most exotic thing on earth. And seeing it from the outside and then being able to go in, and I never knew what to pick up. I didn't know what to research. I was 8, and the librarian very sweetly just let me go in there. So I used to get books on dogs and study dogs every day. That was my theme. So I knew a lot about dogs by the time I was 12. Anyway, my practice as an artist, I've always actually kind of done lots of work around bookworks in my work. I've done author collaborations, I've made artist books, I've created my own ceramic books. Honeyscribe is actually called Honeyscribe because it refers to the ancient practice of scribes kind of making marks onto clay tablets and sort of quantifying the world and making observations of the world in interesting ways. So yes, I saw this open call and I just immediately wanted to apply for it, because I'm going to show you a couple of slides. Emily, can you put the first slide up? So I've been making a series of work called Florilegium over the last 10 years or so. And what they are botanical artworks. They're actually real pressed flowers. This is an awful picture. I haven't got a professional shot of this piece yet. It's very new. But what I do is I kind of tend to work with communities, lots of different communities, and I'll tell you about how I've worked and what I'll be doing for this commission. But yeah, I love the way that these they can talk about place. So I've used lots of different lenses. So this piece here is a very recent piece that I made for and with the community of Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital in London during COVID. So this actually is very similar to what I think might be the outcome, the legacy of this piece of work that I'm making for Libraries Unlimited. But what this is, and it's quite hard to read this image, but they're backlit, so there is a light box and it's on a trolley, and all of those flowers you see there are real flowers that have been pressed by myself and also by the community of the hospital that I've been working with. So when I say that, I mean that I put out an invitation to staff who were working across the hospital during the peak of the COVID crisis and in 2020. And Great Ormond Street Hospital knew about my work and asked me if I would like to come up with something. And because their families weren't able to come into the hospital, well, only one parent can come in, and the staff were really suffering, wearing really complex PPE. So instead of working with just patients, I work with the hospital staff as well, and they went and pressed flowers from their gardens, from their local environment, but also this is from these are the flowers that grow on the rooftop garden at Great Ormond Street Hospital. And then it's mounted. Can I have the next slide, please, Emily? Or that's me making it in my studio. It's very, very exacting work. And the next slide, I think, is a picture of where you see, this is where, so when it's finished. So this little boy here is sitting looking at the piece of work. It's been wheeled into his room. And you'll see on his little cot there, there's also a sort of little bed version of the light box, which I kind of did as a game. So it's lots of different slides, and children can build their own gardens. And that also includes all the plants that the staff collected with little dedications as well. Now, because this is a children's hospital, I couldn't put all of the dedicated messages that I received. Some of them are very personal, some of the staff that had been lost through COVID, and patients as well. But so what I did is I took out all of the little messages and I put those into a separate document, and I think that might happen for this commission too, depending on what I collect. Yeah, you'll see that's the kind of sort of, it will be a bit smaller than that probably, but this is kind of what I'm thinking of doing. So I'm going to make a collection of plants that are pressed in the libraries and by the communities. The time of year will be a bit difficult because it's the deep, dark winter days. Not much will be in flower. So I'm going to be providing people that I connect with flowers, which will be fresh flowers and also pressed flowers. So we're using that language of botanics, which actually is kind of quite nice, because actually lots and lots of people can respond to flowers even if they think that they don't. And I've done quite a few other projects where I've kind of been exploring this. Emily, can we have the next slide? This might show the other context to this work, which is what I'm going to do. So the slide on the right, so these are two really big light boxes that they've just come off exhibition at the museum in Exeter. It was a commission from RAM, the one on the right, and the other one was a separate commission. The one on the right is a commission I did with the staff at the Royal Devon and Exeter Hospital, again during COVID. And what I did is, if you see there's two circles, there's the sort of outer wheel and then the inner wheel. And the sort of outer wheel, again, that is all of the plants that were sent in to me as dedications from the staff that I connected with. So I sent in, I don't know if anyone can actually see me, but I sent in these little packs, these envelope packs, out to the hospital just before vaccines and everything. And I thought, oh God, they're just going to get lost. It was a moment of complete, belief that something might come back. And I'm having this at the moment with this project. So I sent out, I think it was about 600 packs in total, waited, and then suddenly they started to come back to me. They were posted in large amounts, they were collected back up, and I couldn't go into the hospital, but they were coming via a hospital collection point. And these flowers are all different flowers with little dedications next to them, which are both to, again, patients that have died, many of whom were from COVID, also dedications to staff members, and also to little lovely dedications of people that are missing their families, maybe couldn't kind of connect with their families, partly because of the danger of their jobs and that concept of transmission that might happen, especially in the early days before vaccinations, but also people that would ordinarily be able to go and visit their families elsewhere, that awful time where nobody could connect with anybody. So the idea of loss and grief poured into this piece of work. I knew it kind of would, because of, as Emily said, obviously COVID is such an extraordinary time where lots of people are processing lots of really complex feelings. But this was quite something. I think there are about 200 flowers that came back from the community of the hospital. The inner wheel there is represents the Nightingale Hospital in Exeter. The head nurse named all of the 5 wards there after wildflowers, and so I dedicated. I kind of represented each of those places, each of those wards with a flower that represented it there. And then all of the other pieces around it are collected from the community. So they're all the wildflowers that grow within a mile radius of the hospital. And very quickly, the piece on the left is called Herald of Spring, and I made that collecting plants as spring bloomed last year along the river in Exeter. And what I was doing is collecting plants and sending those into a very a community, which is a council community, properties down on Exeter Quay, many of whom are inhabited by very elderly people, some of whom I was working with the community connected there. I was finding out that they were not leaving, some hadn't left their houses for 6 months at all, apart from to get a vaccine. And so I needed to be able to reach into the community, which is what I did with that piece. So again, this theme of loss and bereavement is kind of absolutely infused in this work over the last year, which means that I feel like I'm sort of approaching this commission with some knowledge about what actually might come back. And I'm very excited to be working with Aly. We're going to she's going to run some cafes, and we're going to quietly support those cafes that she was just talking about at both Holsworthy and Oakhampton libraries. and we will be sort of having a sort of flower pressing activity and a way for people to actually have a making thing to do, whilst some people might just want to listen into the cafes that she's running, and some people might want to actually dedicate a flower, or the idea that something might go into this piece of work. We're open-minded about that, and I'm very excited to be working. I've never worked with an end-of-life doula before, and as I said, I'm very excited about the idea of doing that work in these very rural libraries. I do know Holsworthy and Oakhampton quite well. I have lived out that way. So what I'm doing now is I'm doing a lot of listening in. Emily mentioned there's a huge importance to me about how if you're going to work with communities, you have to really listen in and think about how, I use my practice to reach deep into communities, to collect all those diverse voices that are within those communities. And so I'm connecting through the library. So I'm sending out packs and little flower presses out onto the mobile library. I'm going to be making some little presses with the men in sheds, which I'll quickly talk about in a minute. The idea is to go through the services that are dealing with bereavement, with loss. I've got a counselling service that is there for young people aged, I think it's 5 to 24, and they're very interested in the project. There's also a community that live outside Oakhampton, which is a sort of a place where women who are recovering from alcohol or drug addiction or domestic violence live. And so I'm going to be working hopefully with that community as well, so that they can have a press there and collect flowers over a period of time. And then obviously we're going to be doing some drop-in workshops at the libraries in person, and I have a great artist working with me who I have selected to do some work. She's actually trained bereavement counsellor, although we're not going to actually kind of talk about that being something that she is offering, because obviously that's not part of what we're doing, but I thought it's the sensitivity of conversations that come up, and she has great knowledge in how to deal with those. So she'll be running literally a flower pressing station during those dark months of January, which are, from all the people I've been listening to, they're talking about January being the month that they're really worried about this year, especially after a kind of unpredictable Christmas again. So we're trying to do our in-person stuff in January, and then I'll be putting these packs out into the community just before we approach Christmas, and then early into January and February. So I can't remember if there's another slide, Emily. I think there might be one. Oh, that's the close-up of the Nightingale bit. You can see there, if you you can just about see the dedications that are written in pencil. Some of them are extremely moving. So I will be trying, as these packs come back, I will be able to work out whether or not we include those messages, or whether we use, behind me here, I don't know if people can see me, but this is a box that I've bought that I'm going to get the wonderful men in sheds to refurbish, and it will become a kind of index box, I think, because this project does relate to that ancient, I don't know whether many people have come across this as librarians, maybe many of you have, that when you open a book sometimes and a flower falls out, and it's that absolute capturing of a moment in time. I've had it with my grandmother's book, a book that I had, and there are 3 pansies in there that she must have collected when she was a teenager, and that jolt of that sort of captured moment is very much behind this project. So I'm also I've just been I'm badgering Emily left, right and centre with these very weird email requests, I think. I told her not to work with artists, animals or children. I think it's all the same category, but yes, I want to repurpose some of the library books that are now sort of decommissioned and turn them into miniature presses and take those out onto maybe the mobile library, and certainly to the home library service. There's some wonderful volunteers I've heard about who work around Oakhampton and Holsworthy, which are very rural communities, and I thought that might be really nice to sort of create little presses that go out from books themselves. So yeah, just to sort of finish off, I said I'd mention the Men in Sheds again, but they're a brilliant organisation. There's one in Oakhampton and one in Holsworthy. Difficult to reach out to Holsworthy at the moment. I'm not sure they are meeting in person. but Oakhampton most definitely are. So they're going to make me some presses, but it's also a way of just talking to them and actually, you know, that they're all men. They have a parents group called Who Let the Dads Out, who also go along. I think they meet in a church, but it's, again, I think sometimes men don't, quite hard to reach in these sort of projects. So I'm trying to kind of go through the community to find out what you know, where are the places where we can reach men that are perhaps dealing with issues of bereavement. And in fact, Men in Sheds most definitely are. I've heard of several men using that service who will love this project because they're doing something towards it. And also, yeah, community groups, shops, community support services, GP practices, counselling services. So these are all the people I'm talking to now. So they will receive these packs, they will flutter into the community, and then there'll be a moment before we gather them all back. So this piece of work is called The Gathering. Oh, and just to quickly let you know, very recently, when I've been talking to people about this project, they say, what's going to happen to the piece at the end? And I've been thinking that one of the, again, a democratic space that most people in the community have at some point step into is a hospital or a GP surgery. And there's a most wonderful hospital in Oakhampton, a tiny cottage hospital. And I'm thinking that it might be a really good thing to help people want to be involved in it if they know the destination might be there. So I'm working with that idea at the moment. It's not set in stone. So what will happen when the piece is created, it will be fabricated. There'll be a lovely index box, which will have lots of the dedications sort of captured within it, or it might become a book, I don't know yet. And then I'll make a postcard of the finished piece, which we could send back out onto the mobile library. So people that aren't coming into the library may be able to see what's actually happened or what they've created. And then I think we'll exhibit it both at Holsworthy Library and Oakhampton Library, and then after that it may well go into the local hospital. Seems like a good destination. So I'm sorry, I've probably gone over my time, Emily, but I have been watching you and you haven't told me to shut up yet, so I will put myself on mute.
Thank you, Amy. You've done brilliantly there. And yeah, I think just to finish off with that, I think what both Aly and Amy have talked about there is the benefit of really giving that open scope, because as people not involved in the libraries directly, they will look at things and look at our communities in a way that we don't naturally necessarily. So there's some really good learning coming out of that, of those kinds of things as well. Ian, handing back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That was absolutely brilliant. And Amy, what exquisite and evocative work. It's absolutely gorgeous. And Aly, it's just so brilliant and fascinating to hear from a death and dying artiste. What really jumps out for me is that sense of libraries being that anchor, bringing together that public need, that community engagement, with that real professional expertise as well. And it feels like that's kind of a model that really fits here and kind of is very applicable elsewhere as well. But the other thing as well is, as a lot of people are starting to grapple with the new Arts Council funding and investment priorities and investment principles, the idea of the open call process, something that goes almost against what was expected from ACE initially, but is then framed as something that actually meets diversity, inclusion, and some of those investment principles, feels like a really, really positive way to do it, and positive way to make sure that we can get projects and the services in the way that we need them, and using that kind of feedback and using the investment principles as a bit of a lever for that. So thank you so much. One of the other things that has been going on is the Libraries Connected health and wellbeing offer, universal offer, led by Sue Ball, has been putting together with Cruse a bereavement toolkit. So I'm going to hand across to Sue Ball now, who's going to talk about it with Gemma from the Reading Agency. So, Sue.
Thank you, Ian, and hello everyone. Yeah, as Ian said, I lead I'm from Staffordshire Libraries, and I lead the Universal Health and Wellbeing Library offer together with the Reading Agency. And I think, it's really fantastic to see how libraries are playing a really key role in supporting bereavement in local communities. And as we've seen this afternoon, libraries are safe, neutral spaces, and through culture and creativity, books and reading can really help people talk about bereavement, but also, which I think is really important, help people feel connected so they're not alone. So bereavement support is at the heart of the Universal Health and Wellbeing Library offer. We've got a subgroup who are looking at how we work with Libraries Connected and really develop this work. So we're really delighted as part of this work to be working with Cruse, and the toolkit is very much the first strand. So I'm really pleased to introduce to you Gemma Jolly, who's Head of Health and Wellbeing at the Reading Agency. And Gemma's going to tell you about this piece of work. So over to you, Gemma.
Lovely, thank you, Sue, and thanks everyone. I'm just going to try and share my slides and hope that it doesn't all go horrifically wrong, as is wont to do on Zoom sometimes. Can someone give me a thumbs up if they can see that? Brilliant, thank you. So I'm really delighted to be here. As Sue said, my name's Gemma. I'm the Head of Health and Wellbeing at the Reading Agency. It's a new role that I've taken on, and it's really exciting. I too have many fond memories of libraries as a child, not quite as avid as Amy, but not far off, to be fair. Certainly a Wednesday afternoon spent with my nan was often spent in a library environment. So really happy memories of libraries, but also I think understanding how important they are to so many different aspects of community, and how they are really that democratic space for communities to get together. So yeah, really excited to be here, really excited to talk about the work that's been going on around bereavement and reading in terms of the toolkit that's been developed, or the book list as we call it. To start with, I suppose just a little bit of context about the Reading Agency for anyone who's not familiar with us, and again apologies if you are, and this is all very familiar, but we're a national reading charity, so we're funded by Arts Council England, so some familiarity with the MPO that Emily was talking about earlier, which is helpful. And our mission really is to create and deliver reading opportunities which inspire more people to read more, encourage them to share the enjoyment of reading with others, and celebrate the difference that reading makes to all our lives, because we know that it does. And we're committed to using that proven power of reading to tackle life's big challenges, be that supporting skills and learning, supporting health and wellbeing, or connecting communities. And as we all know, probably key areas that have become even more heightened since the pandemic and the ongoing impact of that. Because we know that everything changes when we read, and we want everyone to access the benefits that reading has, and particularly around reading and health. Those benefits can include things like improved quality of life, better health and wellbeing, reduced stress levels, escapism and relief, connecting up socially, which is so important to so many of us, delivering psychological therapy, and even changing the way the brain works in a non-scary way, I should add, in a very positive way. But so the bereavement book list was a partnership between Cruse Bereavement Support, public libraries, and the Reading Agency. And it was really started by looking at how we could support conversations around death, dying, and loss, and signpost the most appropriate bereavement support and end-of-life services for people. It was launched in August 2021. I say it was launched, it was quite a soft launch. It was made available from August 2021. And I will share the link in the chat after the session, and I'm happy to share the slides so everyone can access it. But it was really to pull together existing resources supported by signposting to make things a little easier for people, and to give them that information that is so often lacking when people are experiencing death, dying, and loss. And those resources include the Reading Well bereavement titles from all the existing Reading Well books on prescription lists, but also supportive services, advice on coping with grief, and suggestions for what to say to a bereaved person supplied by Cruse, which I think is really important, because it's that talking about bereavement and loss, which can be very challenging. And it's really considered a piece of work that we've undertaken, putting all those resources in one place, and hoping to raise the profile and extend the reach of the existing resources that are there, and to get more people accessing them, because we know that they're valuable resources. So this slide is just to show you what the front cover of the book list looks like. But I thought I should probably touch on Reading Well for anyone who wasn't familiar with Reading Well. And again, apologies if you are. But Reading Well Books on Prescription programme is delivered with public libraries as part of the Universal Health offer. And it's really a national strategy to support the wellbeing of local communities. So it's funded by Arts Council England and the Welsh Government in Wales. And it's developed with health partners, but also with people with lived experience. So every list has people with lived lived experience informing the development of that list, which is really important. And it's available for all English and Welsh public libraries using a simple but effective model of a curated book list, recommending quality assured self-help reading that people can access themselves or by recommendation from a healthcare professional or other professional to understand and manage their mental health and well-being. So it's about giving people back control via free access to get access to those resources that will hopefully support them understand and manage their mental health and well-being more successfully. And then I've just picked out a few of the resources that are included in the toolkit. So we've taken books for children, and this just sort of documents what's in the toolkit, but obviously a nice picture of the book, the synopsis of the book, so people can get an understanding and see if it's for them when they're looking at it, and then some quotes to support the book and how it's helped people, because I think that's really important, that real world experience of how the books work for people. There's 10 books in the list in total, but I've just picked out a few, and then an example of another book for a young person, and also giving people some more information about the Reading Well for Young People list if they want to use that to support further engagement with books that might be helpful. And again, another example of a book for adults. And I should have said there's 5 Reading Well book lists currently. So there's 3 for adults, 1 on mental health, 1 on dementia, and 1 on long-term conditions. And then there's 2 for children and young people. So 1 for children at key stage 2, so 7 to 11, and 1 for young people called Shelf Help, which is for children aged 13 to 18 as a ballpark, but trying to be accessible around reading needs and what have you. And that's currently in the process of being updated as part of the COVID recovery work, because we know young people have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, including around sort of a sense of loss and bereavement that many have experienced through friends and family members due to the pandemic. And then tying in all of Cruse's expert information and support advice. And I think the really powerful thing for me is this idea of growing around grief. And I think that's something that's really powerful and should be shared much more widely. And the idea that there's a set process to grieve when really there isn't. And it's about what's unique to you as an individual and understanding that it's your own process. So there's some nice stuff in the toolkit around that. And then obviously important to show people where they can go to get help. So on a national level, there's Cruse Bereavement Care, but it also signposts to different organisations based on need. So there's organisations that work with families, organisations that work with young people, for example. And like I said, I will put the link in the chat, and I'm happy for the slides to be shared, but it's there. And I suppose just to say in terms of next steps, we're hoping to do more work with Cruse. They're a very, very important partner for us. And we're hoping that we can look at possibly developing a new Reading Well list focusing on bereavement, because it's been identified by the health group as a priority area, but also by many users as an area that will be really beneficial. So watch this space, and hopefully this time next year we can have more of an update on that one. But yeah, happy to answer any questions that anyone might have about any of that.
Thank you, Sue and Gemma. That was fascinating, and it sounds like some incredible resources coming out of that reading, the Health and Wellbeing Universal Offer Group. I'm just going to open it out to questions. Does anyone have any questions of either Sue or Gemma, or of Emily, Amy, or Ali? We've got about 25 minutes. For questions. There's nothing specific in the chat yet, but please do either put your hand up, put something in the chat, or even just unmute yourself and shout out. Brilliant. So Anne, do you want to just ask that question, maybe expand on it a little bit as well?
Yes, remembered to unmute and not the video bit. Yes, I have never come across an end-of-life doula before, and I just wondered what the organisation does. Is it a national organisation, or are you based down in Devon solely? And what does an end-of-life doula actually do?
Bless you, Anne, for asking that question. I really appreciate it. So end-of-life doulas, we support people at end of life. We also support people, older people and people living with dementia in a non-medical way. So we'll offer that support to the individual and the people close to them. and that can be absolute practical support, like pushing the vacuum round, running errands. It can be being with somebody in the very last days of their life so that they can approach death without fear, if at all possible, and peacefully. So my role can be anything from, as I say, doing the washing up, to accompanying people to medical appointments, to giving respite to a family carer, being alongside the person, to helping the person to prepare for their death and dying in terms of lasting power of attorney, in terms of refusals of treatment, what they want for their funeral. So I've actually never been asked to do anything that I've said no to, and there can be all sorts of requests. And we're sort of like birth doulas, but we're the other end of life. So it's like bookends. So birth doulas bring people into the world, and we see people out the other end. And we are a national organisation, so there's doulas all over the country who would love to join up with their libraries. So I hope that explains.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very interested to hear you are a national organisation, because I was like hoping you were, because it sounds really exciting that the rest of us in other libraries might be able to partner with the organisation then.
I'll put my or I'll put the email address in the chat. Yeah, would that be helpful?
Brilliant, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Graziano, you've got a question about local authority support.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I think you're muted. I think I'm.
Sorry about that. I
Right.
wanted just to ask if you had, or if you asked some support from local authorities, and if you had from local major, did you have any support or obstacle as well in doing activities or workshop of or other initiatives? Thanks.
Thanks. Emily, do you want to take that?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, we are obviously slightly different in that we are commissioned by the local authority, not directly the local authority themselves. But as part of that commissioning agreement, we do keep them broadly aware of anything that we're doing. And certainly when we're going for pots of money like this project, then we make them aware. We haven't had any support from them in terms of financial support or anything like that, but they absolutely are backing up what we're doing. They see the value, as everybody is seeing the value of these kinds of conversations. So they're supporting in terms of pushing out in social media and their newsletters and that kind of thing. We have had no obstacles from anyone, including even the public, which I can't think of a project that we've done in a library where nobody has had some kind of problem with it. So yeah, we find it, without wanting to kind of over labour cliches and things, we've found it a really open door to push. That's not to say everyone wants to get involved, but people don't seem to have a problem with these kinds of conversations happening in library spaces. And I think, you know, Aly's touched on her organisation's role in terms of being non-medical. I think what we are clear on at the moment is that we are taking a very non-religious position on any of this as well. So it is accessible, we hope, to everybody to get involved in and engage with.
Shall I jump in as well, Ian, and just say, I think from our experiences in the health group, libraries are doing different library services, are working in different ways and working with different organisations, but I think most library services are partnering you know, with those local organisations in the community. So it could be a hospice, so for example in Staffordshire we do a lot of work with Compton Hospice, but also undertakers as well. So we've been approached by an undertaker who's keen to start sort of death cafes in libraries. So it's very, very local, I think, and very sort of responsive to community need.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Sue. I just want to bring in LB56828 from the chat, who's just talking about an event that they've got on Monday in Sheffield Library, so the first Death Cafe. So I was just wondering if you wanted to say anything about the experience of, because you're obviously right at the start of doing it. It's the first Death Cafe. So if you wanted to say anything about that.
It's me. It's Liz Biggin from Sheffield Libraries. yeah, we talked to Penny, who is a local doula, some years ago, and for whatever reason, the deaf cafes didn't come off. Though I'm in the library, though I knew she ran them in other places, and last year, sort of during the pandemic, obviously we started to think about this area of work and the stuff that Libraries Connected and the reading agency were doing. So I approached her again, and she was just so keen to do it. We've got Penny running one group and another practitioner running another group. So we got 18 people booking within days, and we've got a waiting list of 8 people. So we're very excited for Monday and just see how it goes and see this as a first step. And just, I think what surprised me in a way is just the interest that it generates. I think somebody else said about people are quite happy to talk about this. And at first I had a few very bizarre conversations with people because I was saying death cafes and people were thinking I meant death as in hard of hearing. So we had a few confusing conversations, but now I think we're just really looking forward to it, seeing how it will go. We're getting a death positive collection together in our central library. So once we get all our books in, things are on order from the list, and we'll get that up and running. So, you know, I hope it's something that will become a regular event for Sheffield Libraries. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz. And hope it goes well on Monday.
Thank you.
Jazz, you've got a question which also could integrate D&J Robinson's question before you. Are you all right doing both of those? Or if not, I'm happy to read the questions out. So it's a question for Emily. So there's 2 questions which are kind of similar, but coming from slightly different angles. So first one, I would like to ask Emily about involving frontline staff so they can talk about death. If there are any general project queries, did you have to do any staff training or have any specialist input? And then Jazz just asked, how do we support library staff for these kind of conversations and what training is available?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Jazz and D&J Robinson, for asking the questions. So obviously staff training, support for staff is always really important in any new conversations that we open up. I think what I would reflect is that for a lot of our staff, we hear these are conversations they have been having for years with people. And as we've all touched on, that might be happening with more frequency or more openness than perhaps they were, as it's far more of a shared experience with COVID particularly. But those conversations have been happening, and library staff are generally trained in order to hear and signpost and that kind of thing. That's not to say that we don't want to do more training, and I think beyond the remit of this project, we are looking at what are those conversations that are being explored as a result of what the artists are doing. Are we finding that the conversations that people want to have with libraries or in libraries are about getting support or just offloading, or are they more in that kind of needing counselling or some kind of professional support, in which case we would never step into that realm and we just need to make sure we're providing better services. So I think part of the role of this project will be to start identifying what that need is so that we can then train our staff rather than presuming that we know what that need is. And I think also for me it links back nicely into what you started off talking this session about, Ian, in relation to the Libraries Connected wider death positive work, and the kind of the role of supporting staff within that work.
Brilliant, thank you, Emily. Sue, is there anything you want to say just from a health officer perspective?
I don't think so, but what we're hoping to do in terms of Cruse is pull together how we can actually support staff. So sort of moving beyond the book list, if you like, and what sort of training can we look at. And also I'm quite aware that in terms of Libraries Connected, that yourselves, that you're also looking at funding to see what opportunities there are for funding. And I think it would be really good if some of that funding can look at, you know, how we support staff and what that training looks like.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because it's that balance of actual proactive training, but also pastoral support almost as well. And yeah. If we haven't got any more questions, there's one person, sorry to put you on the spot, Claire, but we've got Claire Nally on the call as well, I think. And Claire just highlighted before, obviously Claire works for University of Northumbria, and she's been doing a lot of work with the Redbridge libraries and the other death positive libraries, so Redbridge, Newcastle and Kirklees, as well as with the health and wellbeing offer. A lot of the stuff that has come out, so the reading list that came out of the work at Redbridge was led by Claire Nally from Northumbria, along with Stacey Pitsilides as well. And they're looking at doing a broader project. If you're able to, Claire, is there anything you'd like to just add to that and just maybe talk about some of the work that you're doing at the moment?
Hiya. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that obviously we're doing that you're very much involved in is we've got Libraries Connected and Redbridge Library, because they were like the initiators of a lot of the death positive libraries activity. We've got them as project partners on a bid that's going to the AHRC, the Arts and Humanities Research Council. One of the things that we've encountered, of course, which will be very familiar to you, is that you can get funding for artists and third sector provision, or you can get funding for universities, and there's not that much in terms of funding that funds both of those. So that's always a bit of a problem. So we're going for the AHRC, and we're extremely grateful for your support in that, as well as Redbridge Library. Our take on the idea of death positive is a little bit different, insofar as what we'd like to do is interrogate what death positive means, and the origins of that as a term and as a movement in the States in the 1960s and 70s. And I guess also kind of thinking how we can marshal things like fiction and poetry as part of that kind of, I guess, wider offer around well-being. So not necessarily just focusing on, as valuable and important as it is, not necessarily just focusing on bereavement, but also looking at what fiction can offer us, and as I say, what poetry can offer us, and some of that might be quite uncomfortable reading, actually, but then some of the memoirs that I've been looking at from people like morticians and death practitioners, sometimes that can be quite uncomfortable reading as well. So I suppose we're taking a very broad approach in terms of how society acknowledges death, or how it handles death. Part of that is bereavement, but part of it's also a kind of wider agenda. Is that sufficient for what you were thinking?
Yes, that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, that sounds fantastic. And it's that whole thing of kind of creating and exploring that kind of theoretical underpinnings of the practical stuff that we're looking at here. Really exciting, and we'll share any outputs and any research through these networks as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Taylor for Rebecca. I'm going to make a stab and assume that's someone called Rebecca Taylor. Is just telling us about Harewood Library. Is there anything you just want to add onto that?
Hello, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Oh, good. I'm glad I've been able to unmute. Yeah, so I worked for the end of life care team at a local hospital until end of December last year. So I worked closely with the bereavement team and obviously end of life care team. And one of the things that within the hospital settings they use is knitted items. So there'll be a bear that stays with the patient that's dying, and then there'll be a bear that the family can take home. And also blankets as well, knitted blankets, because obviously when patients are in bed, they put the blankets around the shoulders to give them some kind of comfort as well. And then the family can take that blanket home. Obviously during COVID, we couldn't have families coming in. So we asked local communities and local knitters that we had to knit hearts. And then we'd have loads of little tiny hearts that we would give out to all the family members. So yeah, and just with Amy's, with the flower piece, I know she was mentioning about it going into a hospital after it's been displayed. I helped set up bereavement offices within the hospitals. So before that, it used to just be a counter that people came to collect the death certificates. And we wanted to make it more of, you know, nice sofas, plants and stuff. And because I've got an art background, I helped create some artwork for the bereavement offices. And one of the things that we couldn't produce art-wise was anything to do with obviously trees or water because of drowning or of hanging or something. So I actually used flowers, and when I looked at the art piece that Amy's done, it's beautiful. It just reminded me actually, and I think that would really fit well within a hospital setting, because obviously it's such a, you know, nature and beautiful thing. So yeah, it's just lovely.
That sounds absolutely amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. We've got one last comment from Karen Hibbert as well. Karen, I don't think you're directly working for a library, so just saying we're looking to work with the local library to develop skills workshops in the new year.
Yes. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I work at Keach Hospice in Luton, and recently had a conversation with the local main library in Luton Town Centre, and we were talking around the fact that as a hospice we're already running some skills workshops for people in the community to build on their skills and knowledge around having these conversations. And during that discussion, it became apparent that this was perhaps something that there was a gap there that perhaps needed to be filled to support individuals working with the library. Because I think although they were having conversations, I think as somebody else said, on a regular basis, I think it's about enhancing, supporting and upskilling those individuals. So we've had some initial conversations and they were really interested in that. Along with some further workshops that we're looking to develop to support that programme. So hopefully in the new year, all things being well, we may be able to trial something and see how that is received and how that might go. So yeah, it's quite exciting, really.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karen. And again, that just reflects and reinforces what Emily was saying at the start about the power of partnerships, and it feels like the whole thing is really about libraries being at the centre of these much broader discussions and much broader partnerships and broader pieces of work stretching into the community, into professional spaces, into artistic spaces, things like that, which is absolutely amazing. If no one else has any other questions, then I'd just like to say thank you to Emily, Amy and Ali, and Sue and Gemma, and of course to Claire as well, and to everyone who's joined as well. It feels like this really is one of the most dynamic, exciting and adventurous things that's happening in the library space at the moment, and I'm just really pleased that we're all part of it and that we're able to support it. So thank you everyone, and look forward to seeing you at future webinars as well. We are continuing to do these webinars quite regularly as well. Every month or so we're trying to put something on around death positive libraries, because we want to support the momentum that's gathering in the sector as well, and we also want to make sure that there's a space where people can talk to each other and share ideas like we've been able to do here. So thank you.